and welcome to Hospice Insights, the Law and Beyond, where we connect you to what matters in the ever-changing world of hospice and palliative care.
But wait, things to consider before adopting AI tools in your hospice. So Kathleen, I'm so excited for you to be joining me today.
Hey Meg, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, it was so exciting when you came to the firm with your tremendous knowledge base, because obviously I know nothing about AI, which is why you're on the podcast, and so grateful to have you as a colleague. But tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and your background, because you have oodles of knowledge in this cutting edge space.
Sure. So hi, Hospice Podcast World. I'm really excited to be here. So my name is Kathleen Snyder, and I am a senior counsel, colleague of Meg's. I'm based in our Boston office. And my background is as a long-term healthcare attorney, and then with a pivot to technology. So my practice really is at that intersection of healthcare and technology. And I have been working with AI ML startups for the last 6 or so years. So I have been really in a great place to kind of see what's happening, see where the industry is going. I've also had the opportunity, I do a lot of volunteer work with some nonprofit accelerators. So I mentor a lot of really small companies who are doing exciting and innovative things in the space as well. So lots of fun.
Well, in Boston, seems like it would be a hub for, it's a hub for very smart minds. And so smart minds are
It's amazing. There's an AI meetup every other day of the week. I feel like, my schedule is full.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I know you have a lot of experience in post-acute care sort of generally. So I know some of the things you are going to be talking about, might not just be hospice, which is largely provided in the home, but I think just to give our listeners a sense of what are the possibilities, because I think hospice right now, there could be some AI related tools they're using. I mean, like ChatGPT or there's some other products, but I still think that, hospice is starting to dip their toe in it. So it would be exciting to hear sort of just what is going on larger in the space. Because that, I think, will give our listeners a sense of what might be coming in the pipeline for them.
Sure. And, I like to, I did not coin it, but it's a group I belong to has called it the age tech space. So, which is really all encompassing of, folks aging at home, folks, in long-term, kind of post-acute settings, all the way through to the hospice community. But so, certain, recently I was at the AHLA long-term care conference, and I did a talk on, implementing and utilizing AI in your practice. And we had a range of folks who were there. And probably from a poll of the audience, the most significant types of AI products that they were being implemented were in the productivity. So tools like Copilot that, I think folks who are used to Microsoft are very, starting to incorporate into their day-to-day, but also, ambient listening tools, medical scribes, things that are helping triage, appointments or phone calls. And then also, on the more clinical side, some of the software as a medical device, folks come in, whether it's, their continuous glucose monitors or for looking for fall prevention. And, there were quite a few folks who were really interested in the, in the fall prevention aspect of leveraging AI to implement that. So it's, it's really a variety of tools. Although I think some of the things to think about as as you're going ahead and trying to understand, well, what would work in your setting, you really have to think about the the context of how you're deploying the AI and the tool and the vendor and the data that the tool is, trained on. I mean, there's really just a, kind of a peeling of an onion effect of, a lot of things that you need to think about. So, who's the user? What's the use case? And, it really gets at, and here, stop me anytime, but it really
Yeah.
gets at the need for really good governance in your organization, whether you're adopting, productivity tools just for the staff to help them write emails and respond. And, are they using those productivity for case notes and summaries? Well, then they need to pay more attention, right? Because then
Mhm.
it becomes clinical as opposed to purely administrative. It becomes partially clinical. And then, on the other side of the spectrum, you have truly clinical. So, just looking for med interactions and, other areas where it becomes really, really clear that it's clinical, and you want to make sure that it's, FDA cleared and has gone through that whole process. But I tend to focus, in that sweet spot between the productivity tools and uh, the administrative clinical light tools,
Yeah.
because I think that's where there is really just a ton of excitement in the space. Everyone is looking to try to help with burnout. And, it's hard. It's really hard to, for some of our nurses and physicians in the space. And so I think that this is a great opportunity for folks who implement um, with their eyes open. They really need
Yeah.
to be aware, and I don't want to say cautious, but
Well, I think that it's the new shiny thing. And so I think there's some people with new and shiny, like, oh, I just want to keep doing things the way I've always been doing them. And then you have people who are excited about these things, but then sort of the thinking risk management side comes later. And I think the point of this podcast is really to talk about how do some of the infrastructure stuff, because this is coming if you're not already using it. I mean, like ChatGPT, we can talk about that in particular because, like, that's something you might not control, right? And so
yeah, well,
our
and that's
firm has been a real early adopter of a lot of AI. I will profess that I have used none of it. So I may be the bury my head in the sand kind of person, but like I know we just got an email sent out like you shouldn't be using ChatGPT, like the general version because of
yep.
problems with
So
that. And so I just think that you should do the thinking now because of course you might be using AI and you're not even thinking about that you're using AI, or I just through the work that I do, I know that there's a lot of tools and vendors that are developing tools specifically for hospice. And we're probably going to have some of those folks on the podcast at some point, if that's scheduling visits in the most efficient way. So, our
yeah,
nurses and,
well, it's
clinicians are
staffing.
driving
It's
out, yeah,
a
all
hundred
over.
percent, 100%. So just to address the Chat GPT, right here, we'll talk about it a little bit later. But the most important takeaway, I think, for folks who are listening to this podcast who have not implemented policies regarding the use of Chat GPT, this is number one for your compliance risk management group. You need to have a policy that very clearly articulates the generative AI tools that your staff can use. It's really easy to pull up the website and just kind of say, hey, can you summarize this chart or can you summarize this information? And if you're not using an enterprise version of, a generative AI tool and your data is just going out there, that becomes a real privacy problem and real, even without clinical information, if folks are using confidential business information and they're asking ChatGPT to create a chart or something else, that information is out there. So
Yeah.
everyone listening, make sure that you have a no ChatGPT from home policy, that, your employees are only allowed to use their, the approved tools that the company has vetted and, either has a subscription or understands where the data is going and how it's being used. That number one takeaway. I
Yeah,
told it to everyone, like,
absolutely.
number
Yeah,
one takeaway.
yeah.
So,
Because
all right, now we can jump into the
yeah,
fun stuff.
yeah. Because I think that that's really important because it is just available to anyone. And I think you point out a really important intersection with HIPAA and privacy and all this stuff, which sort of leads into the question of what is the law in this space? Because it's like, I mean, it's probably federal and state, and it's like, you know,
Evolving, it's
yeah, like
fluid.
my mentor, Mary Michael, she would always say, "We're building the plane while we're flying it." And
A
so
hundred
that sort of
percent.
seems like a good analogy for this.
Yeah, 100%. So, I think the best way to describe the law is that it's fluid. Um, when with regard to AI specific regulation, um, the new administration has rolled back some of the previous administration's executive orders regarding AI and the use of AI. So on the federal level, it's a little bit in flux. I think that folks in the healthcare space are very cognizant of privacy, which is great. I mean, we really spend and have spent decades thinking about HIPAA and how HIPAA applies and making sure that we're our staff is trained and folks really understand the parameters of HIPAA. So on that front, HIPAA still applies.
Yeah,
It's really important to understand where your data is going. But some of the really interesting work I think is happening now at the state level, which again is fluid. California, of course, California
yeah,
has, a newly effective law in place that, requires a, kind of disclosure if a patient communication is, uh, generated by AI or without any kind of human intervention. If a doctor has read it, then maybe you don't have the same disclosure requirements. But it does appear that a lot of the work that's out there in the AI space, people want to know, like, am I talking to a
yeah,
bot or am I talking to a human? And sometimes you can't tell, right? Especially perhaps if you're elderly, and I think that that's kind of an impetus behind a lot of the legislation that you want to that transparency. And so I think many of vendors that I have interacted with in this space, either as clients or mentees or just companies in the space, they tend to disclose. Hi, this is AI bot from XYZ, and let me help you with your scheduling, right? So people tend to be in that space where they are, uh, you know, disclosing, but not everyone. Not everyone is in that. I recently was working on some diligence for a deal, and the company was an AI company, and they didn't disclose that you were talking to a bot. They also didn't have anyone who was tracking the state and federal laws regarding AI. So that
mhm,
was a little yellow sticky
yeah, yeah,
that on that diligence email. But I do think it's really important that folks have a trusted source for this. And a shout out to our colleagues in Denver who have a really robust process for tracking all of the AI state laws and federal laws that are out there. I think it's a it's a task that I think they update it once a week.
yeah.
It's just continuously evolving. So
So is the and it's probably hard to generalize, but I'm assuming states aren't trying to squash this and say, like, we shouldn't evolve into AI. Is it more the focus of the regulation is about transparency and then security of the data? Like, what generally is government trying to regulate around in this space?
sure. So I'll say I don't think the states are trying to squash it. I don't think the regulation is trying to kind of tamp down but I think that depending on how some of the laws, actually are implemented, because, for example, the California uh, health AI a law is just effective at the beginning of this year. We'll see how it plays out in real life, but it's looking for transparency, right? You see a lot of proposed bills that physicians need to make, or a healthcare professional needs to make the decision about healthcare. There's a lot of concern about the use of algorithms in prior authorization and
Yes.
other areas, which is not exactly on point for this population, but there is a lawsuit going on right now with the use of algorithms targeting rehab stays, and so in a Medicare Advantage space. So it's very much, people want to make sure that their doctors are making the decisions about their healthcare, and there's a lot of administration around that, and like we could go way into the details. Massachusetts has a proposed bill about that. I'm like, but our Massachusetts insurance laws already kind of require this. So,
Oh,
there's some duplicative requirements that may not align exactly. So you really need someone who's focused on it and thinking about it and saying, how does this insurance law in Massachusetts overlay with this proposed, AI regulation? And is it duplicative? Do we need it? Couldn't you infer from the insurance
yeah.
reg? But and so it's been pretty interesting. I was recently um, doing some work for a client and looking at Medicaid requirements, and some state laws, just by virtue of their procurement requirements for state vendors, which in this particular state included Medicaid, providers, that they were pushing down their state AI policies to the groups that treated Medicaid patients. I was like, whoa,
Yeah.
are people paying attention to this? That part was, I'm glad it's on my radar now. It's now on my checklist, but that was a surprise. So I think, just to take a step back, the federal law is definitely in flux. I think that there is some, there are guidance out there from the FDA, certainly, and there's guidance from ONC that regulates healthcare technology, and so I think those are likely to stay where they are. But we really have to stay tuned. But I think the real action is going to be at the state level.
Yeah. Well, and I think sort of the last thing I wanted to get into is sort of the do's and don'ts, like what's how to operationalize AI and thinking about legal and compliance issues. And I think one thing as you're talking that, and it's that diligence story, is this is just an observation. So you tell me if it's right, but like, don't expect that your vendor has knows the laws in your particular state. So they may
Yep,
be selling you a product that, like, actually you as the provider who's going to buy this and use this probably needs to know what your state law is around using these tools. Because we know, I mean, I'm sure this isn't any different than other contracts. Like, there may be very few, representations that this complies with law or anything like that. So I think it is the onus of the provider to, as you say, understand what laws are in their state related to AI, and don't just think, well, this vendor sending, selling this in New Hampshire, so it must be like okay, and however it functions is fine, right? Because
yeah,
it's and as great of a sales job as someone might do, right? You I think need to um make sure that you have an understanding of that and not just rely on, what
that's
may be a sales pitch.
yep, that's 100% right. The second most important thing out of that I'd love for people to take away from this podcast is that you have to diligence your vendors. you really need to understand, what they're selling you, how they're using your data. Are they compliant? And, you know, you just need to be thoughtful about it because many of these vendors are new and innovative. I mean, there's some more mature companies in the space, but I think that, especially if you're working, and I come from a startup background, so, I don't want to be telling tales out of school here,
Yeah.
but you really want to make sure that as a provider, you're looking into where is your data, like what is happening with the data, how are they using your data, um, and then how are they interacting with your patients? Are they yeah, and then this is for more clinically engagement, but also for the scheduling and some of those things where you're still engaging with patients, and you just want to kind of keep that in mind and ask really good questions, ask deep questions, ask about their model, ask about the data their model was trained on, and this becomes more important as we move into um, uh, you know, uh, actual clinical use cases where you are, something that worked in one hospital might not work in, a rehab space or a hospice space. The data is different, the population makeup is different, the case mix is different. So you really just want to kind of think about that. But then also, how what kind of insurance do these
Yeah.
companies have? Just the risk shifting provisions that us contract lawyers love. Um, they're not, the indemnification could be beautiful, but if they don't have any money, then
Yeah.
you want to
Exactly.
make sure you're asking that have your lawyer ask the hard lawyer questions, and then it becomes a little bit of a risk management. But just
And just
again,
let's pause there because I think that's a really important point. And I think these contracts that you're going to be signing for these products probably worth having a lawyer look at those because so EMR contracts, we rarely get asked to review those. When we get asked to review them is when they're, the hospice is wanting to terminate those. And then, the vendor is holding their data hostage and we're having to deal with all this. And it's like, you should have spent some time and energy on the front end. Now, negotiated an EMR contract, like they're probably not going to budge on a lot of that stuff, but like
some
I'm gonna
space. There's
yeah,
some wiggle room.
exactly. Cash all my chips in on these 2 points, like
Yeah.
the rest of it. And so I think, word to the wise here that, as you said, like the risks are about where's your data being held, who owns it, all that stuff. Um, you know, the insurance, I mean, that's sort of an internal thing too, is what insurance do you have if something goes wrong and whatnot. But I do think this is, and obviously I don't feel qualified to review these contracts, but thankfully I have folks like you and others that have a lot of experience in the space to be able to issue spot and also I think be pretty practical about what is worth pushing back on and what isn't,
Absolutely.
so you're not saying, giving a really, um, you know, an email that says everything that's wrong with this contract because it's sort of like, well, no, you're not going to be able to get most of that. So that's just,
Right.
zone in on the things that we think we can actually get movement on that are critical from a risk management standpoint.
Absolutely. And, I think you'd be surprised sometimes, especially, you know, smaller companies that are really excited to work with you because they'll have access to your data and they can continue to improve and their products and they'll perform the service and improve the service. They want to work with you almost as much as you want to work with them, because of that ability to continue to improve and fine tune the product that they're selling. So I definitely think that you have some leverage, but there's also, and we haven't really touched on it at all, but there's liability for, your providers, for your licensed professionals that, they you want to keep in mind, and I can tell you as a vendor attorney, I always 100%, it is always the physician's responsibility to confirm XYZ. It is always the obligation of the entity that is using the tool to confirm that it is accurate and correct. And, I was recently at a conference where, there was a physician who's pushing back on that stand, because that's pretty universal that, folks are, you wouldn't take on your intern's work without kind of giving it a once over, so that the physician, the licensed professional, really has to sign off on it. And the physician who was speaking was like, how many people review, the terms and conditions before you buy an app, or before you use something? And my hand was one of very few that went up in the audience. And they're like, that's right. You can't expect physicians who are being told to use this by their institution, who are, being provided this tool by their EHR, who are, being pushed in this way, to then have to take all of the liability from a professional licensure. So there's a balance, certainly. But I think it is very much important that folks understand. And, and maybe we could talk just a little bit about governance in this space. So if you're thinking about using an AI tool and, running the gamut from a productivity Copilot-esque to the, the more focused clinical and everything in between, you really want to think about your use cases, and you want to think about, okay, who's going to be using it? How is it going to be used? What happens if it goes wrong? And it's really important that you partner, from a governance at your institution, that you partner with your IT group. If you have a CIO, great. If you have outside IT support, you or a consultant. Actually, some of our folks have, sometimes we do a little AI governance at the firm. So that might be something to think about. We have a group that does that. But and then to partner with your legal, your compliance, your risk management. And, sometimes in organizations, legal and IT are not, they don't always agree.
Yeah.
And so for the implementation of AI products, I think it's so important that folks come together at the front end, understand the use cases. And, if you're an IT or operational person listening to this, I would definitely, encourage you to bring your lawyers up to speed at an early, stage, saying like, hey, we want to, do this. These are the use cases, so that your lawyers can feel comfortable that, ultimately your patients and your business are going to be, safe.
Yeah.
So I think that governance piece is really important. And there are lots of great experts out there. Your internal in-house lawyers might not be an expert in, health IT, but there are lots of folks who are able to, kind of help, either on a consulting basis, or, we work with our clients on, as our external counsel to help with specialized questions. So I think that's just a really important to have that holistic governance approach.
Yeah,
from day one.
So now's the time to start on this infrastructure. So the do is begin, and the don't is put your head in the sand, because ChatGPT is out there right now, and you got to quash, people using whatever the open one is, not the enterprise version. So there's, some basic stuff, even if you think you're not using AI right now, there's things you need to do. So what an interesting, exciting, area. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise. And given that it's a fluid space, my guess is you're going to be back here momentarily. We'll have to get this podcast out quickly, because who knows, the laws could change.
Exactly.
Before we know it. So super, super fun topic. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Hospice Insights, The Law and Beyond. Thank you for joining the conversation. To subscribe to our podcast, visit our website at hushblackwell.com or sign up wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, may the wind be at your back.